Hi everyone and welcome to Riskologists. This podcast is brought to you by Optimise and hosted by me, Pat Bradshaw.
And me, Nicola Boyle. Optimise are thrilled to host this podcast series where we'll be speaking with some of risk management's most respected and esteemed thought leaders from across the UK and beyond.
Throughout Season 3, we'll be exploring our guest journey within risk management, as well as exploring key conversations and topics around the overarching theme of the season being the future of risk management.
Our goal is to create a platform in which ideas and thoughts can be shared in order to inspire and educate our audience, and to ultimately give back to the risk management community across the world.
So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi everyone and welcome to this episode of Riskologist. As always, I'm your host Pat Bradshaw.
And I'm your co-host Nicola Boyle, and today we're joined by Mark Baybutt. How are you feeling, Mark?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming along.
Our pleasure. I feel like this has been in the works for a while. I feel like when I saw you at Project Controls Expo a couple of years ago and working at National Highways alongside you, and then tried to call you at a recent event.
You did.
Trying to get you involved.
Yeah, I think you tried in season 1 and we failed.
Oh God, yeah. I think I did message you on season 1, didn't I?
Yeah. So it's been
been
in the pipeline a while.
Been a minute. But yeah, no. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So we just always start the podcast's episodes the same, so just a bit of a journey to date from yourself, so you can be as detailed as you like or as vague as you like, just about your background, your roots, your career.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start, I guess. I think like a lot of risk professionals, I didn't plan to come into risk. It wasn't an aspiration. So I started off in kind of IT and computer science. Which was my kind of degree. And then as part of that, I did a placement year, as part of which I ended up working in project controls, really enjoyed the risk management aspect, and then kind of went back to it as a graduate. So my kind of first role professionally was within light rail, working on Manchester Metrolink for kind of about 5 years, which is where I kind of learnt the craft from seeing projects through from business case to kind of delivery and into service. Became a bit of a tram geek. It wasn't something I was expecting.
Are you still a tram geek?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think with a lot of my career, I've worked on infrastructure projects. So like, I think when you see things come to life and you see people using them, I do geek out a little bit still and get the tram or train or.
What year did that start? When did you join that commission?
So I started. Well, I did a bit of it on placement in 2007, 2008, and then kind of properly launched into it in 2009 as a graduate, and then I think I was there till 2014. Nice.
So, is this back when the trams were still like green and white and a little minging, or was it before they all went yellow?
They were. So they were the. I've just said I'm a tram geek, I can't remember. But it was they were the old ones with the like green and cream livery, and then the M5000s are the new ones, which are the bright yellow ones.
Yeah.
Got up at some stupid time to go and watch the first ones running.
Love that.
Yeah,
love that.
It was good. So yeah, that was kind of the start, and then after that went into the nuclear industry for a little while, and then went back to WSP as a consultant for a number of years, working on kind of highways and gas projects and other bits and pieces. Then went on to Turner & Townsend, where I was seconded out to Network Rail, as amongst other kind of clients, and then joined National Highways, head of risk, and then from there. I've joined Rolls-Royce SMR, where I'm currently head of risk.
How are you finding that?
Yeah, loving it. It's really exciting kind of business. So we're designing a modular nuclear power station, so small modular reactors, which will hopefully deliver clean, kind of affordable energy for everyone.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really exciting time for us.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice. I remember when we were at that event recently and you were talking about your journey today, and we already sort of had landed on the future of risk management as a theme, and you're talking about your previous experience in like computing and computer science and stuff. I was thinking, this will be absolutely spot on. In terms of the sort of title of the episode, obviously we're going to be, as everyone will have noticed, we're going to be talking about embedding resilience around lessons learned and sort of really using real change through lessons learned. Why did you land on this topic out of interest? Because just for the benefit of everyone listening, we tend to give everyone the choice, the sort of, we'll say, this is the theme, pick and choose. How come you landed on this one out of interest? Is it something that's been sort of struck a chord over your career?
Yeah, I think so. So I've kind of seen, getting old enough now to have seen a few cycles of things kind of moving and changing. And I think when you look at, so obviously the series is about the future of risk management. And when you look at kind of some of those cycles, we kind of go through periods where risk is a hot topic. And then periods where it maybe isn't. And usually those kind of cycles are triggered by events, world events, so like financial crash, 2008, 9, and kind of risk management becoming prevalent again. And then again now, at post-COVID world, we saw kind of an explosion of interest in risk management, and there's probably been things in between that would trigger that. And I think the more that I've worked on different projects, history repeats itself generally. Yeah. Organisations forget stuff. The corporate memory is people's memories can be quite short, and I think fundamental is making sure that we don't just do kind of lessons capture and stick it in a database or kind of tick a box at governance gateways, but really kind of build that in, so that kind of risk management becomes part of the everyday. As it is for us in our daily lives. We do things without. I think we kind of manage risk without thinking when you put your seatbelt on and when you're crossing the road even. So there's organisationally, it's about trying to embed that risk management and ingrain it in the same way as we can, so that it doesn't just rely on those cycles, that we kind of make a tangible difference all the way through. It's something I'm quite passionate about, I guess.
Is it were you tempted at all by the sort of AI, more techie side of things, given your previous experience? Or
yeah, a little bit, but I guess it's not a world that I'm that familiar with, so I don't think I could do that topic justice. So I think I can see that there's the role of risk professionals will change in kind of interpreting that information, but as we do now, we've got to kind of interpret and help support businesses make the right decisions. That's ultimately one of the things we're trying to do. And if there'll be new tools for doing that, and I think it's about learning and transitioning to that. But it's not a world that I think, because of the organisations that I've worked for, there's been a hesitation to adopt kind of AI applications. It's obviously becoming more prevalent, but there's still a job to do.
No, exactly. And I think, to be fair, I think I've mentioned this 100 times on this series so far, is when we sort of landed on the future of risk management, I was under the impression that every single person we spoke to was going to want to talk about go down that avenue, and we've actually been really pleasantly surprised. I'd say probably less than 20% have wanted to talk about that, and it's this sort of stuff, like you say, which is, you can have all the best information and the best technology, but it's all about how you actually add value to the organisation. I think this is a perfect way to do it, because in my sort of quite short career so far, I've not seen organisation that's doing it amazingly well. Sort of referred to it as sort of risk accounting, where you do a lot of all of the not necessarily the box ticking, but you're great at capturing the information, but like you say, it ends up in a database, and then you crack on.
Not doing anything with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So just sort of leaning on there, just again on the title, so embedding resilience. So what does that truly mean to embed resilience in an organisation? And then how can we distinguish that from traditional risk management practices?
So I think if you think about resilience and kind of business continuity, risk and how this kind of plays into a life cycle, risk is the front end bit. Risk is about prevention, really. The resilience piece is like bounce back ability, I want to call it. How able is a business to recover from a risk event? And there's obviously a relationship between kind of risk management and business continuity, in that your fallback planning for your risks is where you're kind of testing out you might be testing out business continuity plans. So there's a relationship there to kind of link them across. So I think true resilience is, I mean, think about it in terms of a team. If you've got a team and you take somebody out of it, if that team is small, you're not going to be able to kind of run at full capacity and deliver what you've got planned. Whereas if it's big enough and you've got kind of people understanding each other's trades, perhaps, then you can kind of switch people in, switch people out. So I think resilience is about being tested and then being able to kind of bounce back from an event. So I think the difference from a resilience perspective to traditional kind of risk management is like I say, it's in the relationship between the two.
Yeah.
So the overlap is key, and managing the relationship between the two. I think there's resilience within risk though. If you think about like contingency management, for example. So if you've got enough contingency, you're going to be resilient to the risk events. So you'll be able to manage those within the parameters that you've kind of set.
Yeah.
So I think the resilience can mean lots of different things in lots of different situations, but I think from a risk perspective, I see it as being the kind of risk events leading into something which you've got to recover from.
Yeah.
Whatever that readiness is to recover, whether it's having contingency to be able to react to it, whether it's bringing people in and then having the different diversity of resources able to kind of fill gaps, or kind of diversity of supply in your supply chain. There's kind of, it's having the ability to kind of go down a different route when your planned route isn't available, and kind of then a relationship, or the relationship with like business continuity is then testing that and kind of really testing that ability to bounce back.
In terms of business continuity, is that the responsibility of everyone in the organisation, or is that a discipline which is allocated to a specific person to or a specific discipline to manage and understand? Like, for example, just the example used earlier in terms of being able to have different people do different roles. We're obviously a very small team here in terms of just the podcast team, and if obviously without Nick and I, it would be a bit of a showstopper. But with Lucas, for example, he's responsible for getting all the tech set up, but both Nick and I also know how to do that, because Matt was very passionate about, if Lucas isn't here, then you need to be able to have a fallback plan. Is that the same? And obviously that'll probably feed all the way through different disciplines in the organisation. Is that the responsibility of the organisation to ensure everybody knows that's been fed through in terms of you need to be resilient right the way across, or is there a different discipline which outlines that, if that makes sense? Sorry, that's a long-winded question.
No, it's a really good question, and that's a really good example, like a really good example of it in practice. So I think if I've seen it work differently in different organisations. Sometimes it's part of risk, and it's actually kind of risk issues management, business continuity, all kind of goes together. Yeah. In other organisations, I've seen it separate, but it's worked in a similar way in that you might have like a business continuity team, but they'll kind of set a standard and set some guidelines and framework. But it's the responsibility of the business to develop their business continuity plans for certain situations, because a central team isn't going to know the kind of the way that your podcast works and the kind of ins and outs of that. So you're best placed to kind of put that in place and develop it. So it's up to, and then it's about the people who need to knowing where those kind of response plans are, and you're able to just react in a situation rather than it being a plan that's stuck on a shelf somewhere.
Someone's at risk, isn't it? It's not our job we're not managing the risk. It's our job to just prod and poke, and it's the job of the people that you're speaking to have that intimate knowledge of the risks that they're responsible for.
Yeah. So you might have a business continuity risk, and then somebody might own that, and then there might be kind of action owners in the same way. You've got action owners for certain parts of the business who might own different parts or your fallback plans for which probably correspond to a business continuity plan, which kind of relate across.
Okay, interesting.
Makes sense. So can you share, do you have any specific examples where an organisation has successfully transformed a crisis into an opportunity by applying lessons learned? Is there anything that's kind of any examples off the top of your head?
Not necessarily. I mean, crisis into an opportunity. I think the obvious one for me is COVID. So the organisation that I was working in at the time of kind of COVID kicking off was already ahead of the curve on tech and ready to kind of adapt to that situation. And then a lot of organisations have kind of adapted beyond that
Yeah.
to kind of soak that up as a kind of new normal. Some organisations are now going back to pre-COVID. You've got to be in every single day physically, but I think turning a crisis into an opportunity, that's an example of how some businesses have kind of taken learning from that, seen that actually they've got greater level of efficiency. They don't have to have the same overheads, footprint, office space, and all that. And it's kind of proven and they're kind of transformed on the back of that. I mean, that's the most widespread example I think I can think of in terms of a crisis.
Yeah.
I'll play on a slightly different, not quite a crisis, but a kind of downside, which is kind of given our business case for what we're doing to some extent. So if you think about kind of the way that nuclear projects are traditionally delivered, kind of end up with the kind of long tail impact on kind of significant delivery risk. We've taken kind of lessons learned from all sorts of different sources associated with Royal Academy, for example, and built that into what we're doing. So it's not proven yet by any stretch, but we're the whole concept of what we're doing with SMRs is to take not quite a crisis but a big problem with kind of the delivery of significant projects and really embed that into the product rather than kind of relying on traditional methods. So it's about, so when you think about lessons learned, it's about looking at what's going wrong with a thing, really understanding that, and then building it into the core and the fabric of what you're doing, rather than I've seen some kind of stage gate reviews for projects where and this is where it should be, in a sense that you go through a stage gate review and have you considered lessons learned? Tick, yes, we have.
You've just thought about it.
Just thought about it.
Yeah.
But how have you?
Yeah.
Really, in the same way that you poke and prod in a risk review, how have you considered lessons learned?
Yeah.
Demonstrate to me that what you've done, how you've applied that lesson, what you've done is different, why you think it's going to work, and kind of what's the golden thread, if you like. We use that term a lot in certain situations. What's the golden thread from that lesson to tangibly what you're doing differently and why you think that's going to be different, and kind of proving that. So that there's I think, so not necessarily, I think I've not seen that many crises that have kind of transformed things, but I think I've seen projects try and do things differently, and then some of the projects I've worked on a little bit maybe controversial in the past in terms of what they've done, but they've essentially capitalised on those opportunities to kind of do things differently.
Yeah. Do you think the litmus test for like true business continuity and resilience is these like ground zero crises like COVID and like the financial crisis, where organisations who are resilient and do have good business continuity are making opportunity in crises, versus sort of a lack of resilience in between those, where an organisation might be sunk just via death by 1,000 cuts and they might not necessarily attribute it to we weren't resilient enough to survive, versus a huge crisis where in COVID they've gone, we're definitely not resilient enough to survive, and they can point to something tangible versus sort of just death by 1,000 cuts, if that makes sense.
I think you've got to look out for those indicators all the way through. So people realise that something's gone wrong with risk management, like when something big happens. There's a big problem. There's a you hit the headlines, which is what nobody wants, and ultimately that's what we're trying to avoid with risk management practice. So if but you can see those indicators all the way through. So let's take the COVID example. If part of your resilience strategy, so whether it should or shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody, it was on the kind of global risk register in the top 5 for a good number of years before it happened. It's still up there in the top 10 for another one. Now, if we talk about kind of the relationship between risk and resilience and kind of risk and fallback planning, if you were testing out those kind of resilience plans and your business continuity plans, i.e. checking your stores at PPE, as part of that fallback, checking that you've got whatever measures in place and kind of testing that as you go through, then you're going to have those indicators of preparedness early on,
flagging
kind
up
of on an ongoing basis. It's like when you've got risks that you maybe risks that aren't very high, but they're still risks to the business. You still need to kind of monitor them, and you kind of still checking your controls are in place all the way through. So kind of from a business lens, you kind of you need to test the effectiveness of controls. And I think when you see kind of weaknesses and gaps in those controls as you're going through, those are the indicators that you need to pay attention to. Analogy, I sometimes describe, risk. I've described myself as like a canary in a coal mine of risk.
Yeah.
Being risk manager is something we're kind of indicating. If we're indicating there's a problem, it's not always the best comparison to make, because obviously they don't last very long. Canaries in coal mines when there's a problem, but there's, if we see those indicators all the way through, and you're raising them and giving kind of highlighting that there's a problem that we need to look at, your 1,000 cuts, you might know after 2 or 3 that you've got that you would have a problem. The problem that you've then got is priority, because are people going to be bothered about something that's low down on your risk register when there's other fires that need putting out? So there's always that trade-off. But this is what I mean about the kind of cycle of things. Everybody's scarred because of what happened with COVID at the moment, and it's probably quite high on the agenda, but it's probably fast slipping down the agenda with other things that are happening in the world. So there's I think our job is to try and cut through some of that and help people identify what they need to do, actionable, make it. And if it goes into a list of things that are prioritised, then fine. But that people can make eyes wide open decisions about what to prioritise and where the risk is. If they don't do that thing, if they don't go and kind of prepare in that way, then you've got that risk, and you might mean this for the business. And then it's a balance, isn't it? It's a decision. You weigh up what you're willing to accept, not being prepared for that event, not being able to bounce back, and that's where we come in and help and guide people through that in terms of trying to make those decisions. And that tools like decision trees come in.
Yeah.
So you can really marry risk management up with that kind of fallback planning and continuity planning.
Yeah.
Love that. Cheers, Mark. So in terms of future proofing, then, what do you think, or how do you think organisations can ensure that changes they implement today remain relevant, and like we said earlier, they don't just get lost in the ether? And then secondly, is there a role that leadership can play in driving that change and sort of continuously foster that that culture of learning and adaptation and right down to the core of what the business would do and how they operate?
So future proofing, kind of resilience, as we said earlier, there's corporations forget, businesses forget, people change. So there's a need to kind of embed lessons and embed it into the kind of day-to-day of the business. Now, for the most part, the way that you do that is embedding lessons into your core processes. So if you've got a quality management system, an integrated management system, you kind of need to inflict the changes onto that. So really understanding what the lesson is important, using techniques like your 5 whys and drilling down into what the kind of root cause of the lesson is. Then embarking on a change program. So kind of assessing with your stakeholders whether that's the right kind of root cause, what can we do differently, and then understanding the scale of that change. Is it going to need funding? Does it need a project organisation around it? Could be a small change, like a change to a form. Could be quite a significant change. Might be a project that you need to implement and kind of change over a period of time. But whatever it is, it needs to kind of simplify things and embed it into the kind of the nature of the way that the business does operate. So if that's an automated workflow to make sure that people follow the steps all the way through, and don't skip stuff on a procurement thing because that's where we've gone wrong when we've not kind of done a supplier questionnaire or whatever it was. There's a route kind of a route through doing that, and then kind of leadership has to get behind it. So if the tone from the top is really important, and leaders need to kind of walk the walk, demonstrate that they're embracing change, demonstrating that we want to learn, we want to progress, we want to make marginal gains. You know, every improvement that we can make helps the organisation perform better, helps people maybe save time, kind of improves the overall performance of the business. So that continual improvement and kind of marginal gains journey is really important. So I think leaders need to show their interest in that, and again, kind of two-way thing, be open to listening to ideas and to problems and to kind of collaboratively finding a solution. So I think from a leadership perspective, it's about being open to understanding how the business can adapt, why it needs to adapt, and kind of listening to its people.
Yeah.
In terms of like a correlation between risk and business continuity, or some organisations call it risk and value, do you think there's always a correlation between a strong risk culture and a strong resilience culture or strong business continuity culture? Because I feel like, from my perspective, thinking I could be wrong, that you could have a strong risk culture, but you might not necessarily do any business continuity stuff or value engineering, lessons learned, whereas it'd be tough to do lessons learned without a good risk culture. Do you think, is that correct, or do you think they always have to go hand in hand? One can't exist without the other?
I think we can talk about lots of different kind of cultures, and there are lots of different. I think you're right. There's different maturity of like understanding of things. I think if you start with a good culture, and we talk a lot about nuclear safety culture, for example, but I think a good culture where it's open, people feel safe to challenge each other, safe to ask questions, and it's you know, somewhere that feels good to work there. It might get difficult, it might get challenging, but people support each other and people kind of ask questions. So I think you've got to start out with a good culture. That adds, you might add strands to it, but having that kind of open, safe environment for people to be in is absolutely vital in any case, because that then moves on to different things in terms of like safety culture, calling each other out on, you know, if you feel comfortable and safe in that initial, you'll feel comfortable saying to somebody, I don't think you should carry that open cup up the stairs, or make sure you hold the handrail, or whatever, in simplistic terms, whatever it might be. Because if we can do that, when it gets more difficult, we can have the more difficult challenges and more difficult open conversations. So, and kind of a big thing that we talk about is psychological safety. So feeling safe to have those difficult conversations, bring up difficult topics. So I think that leads on to kind of the risk culture, in that, so the extension of that is if people feel safe to raise risks and have difficult conversations about risk, open conversations about what needs to change, what mitigation action needs to change. I think whether it's culture beyond that, or whether it's risk or it's maturity. I think we stray. I think when we stray away from, we start straying into maturity in different things, and I think it depends on the understanding people have. Because even with the risk process, people might have a basic understanding. They might have a really good understanding about risk management. But absolutely diabolical at a risk process. So you know, and that goes back to what we were saying before. Some things you do with risk management, you do naturally. You do it without thinking. So you might be great at managing risk, but absolutely terrible at, you know, filling in a risk register, and the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. You can have a brilliant risk register, and the organisation can be kind of, you look at the so what on the, you know, how the organisation is performing. So you've got to look at a range of indicators with that. Sorry, going up a little bit off on a tangent there.
No, that's a fantastic point. I think, But
I think to your original question, like if the resilience culture, I think it probably is a cultural thing. I think it's a maturity thing, and you've got to take steps. You know, risk management is one thing. issue management is another.
Yeah.
The ability to recover. So all of this requires the space to think ahead. Because if you're talking about resilience culture, we're probably so focused on what we're trying to do right here, right now. Might be thinking about, well, we might have some issues that we've got to deal with. How we manage them, I'm not sure. We've got some risks that we're probably thinking about, but we might not review every month. We might not get to the end of the register every month. To be thinking about stuff that, how do we recover if those risks down the bottom? It's a few steps away from the present, which and for most people it might be a few steps too far. But as long as you've got somebody, and this is where kind of diverse teams and strengths in teams are really important. So we've done, well, not just now, but the teams that I'm in now and teams that I've been in previously, we've looked at strengths. So we use, I won't mention the model, but we use a model where we look at kind of individual people's strengths, and then we look at the kind of strengths across the team and see where people naturally fall. There's lots of different kind of ways of doing that, different tools and stuff out there, but the one that we use, we really, really like. It really resonates with everybody individually in terms of, some of them put you in a box. I don't know if I like being in that box. This kind of points out what your kind of individual strengths are, and you can, that's me. So using that. So if you've got somebody who's like really detail oriented, really kind of task driven, complete a finisher, and they need to get on with that, let them get on with that. Yeah. That's their strength. If you've got somebody who's got really strategic vision and is that forward thinker, get them on the resilience plan, get them thinking about it and looking, and kind of that then, the strong culture thing is then about playing to everybody's strengths and getting the best out of people, and not trying to get the strategic thinker to do the detail stuff, because they ain't going to enjoy it. It's not going to work. You're not going to get the best result, and it's all about getting, you want to get the best result out of people, but also ultimately the end.
I think it comes back to exactly what you said before in terms of it's that culture versus maturity. Before you've worried about a specific type of maturity, what's the culture? And it might be when people join, you might say, okay, what personality type are you? And that's before you've even gone into the detail of exactly what it is they're going to be doing, but you've sort of already armed with that information when they're moving into that position, and almost resilience in itself there, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. It's a helpful way. I think it's a helpful way of like structuring. I mean, obviously you got to be careful about how you do that in terms of you don't want to be you got to do it in an open way. No, of course.
Make sure people are on board with what you're asking
to be
just like, all right, you're on this.
Over there. You're a red.
Moving on then. So how can organisations effectively balance short-term risk mitigation with long-term resilience building, especially in increasingly volatile global environment?
Okay, so balancing kind of the here and now of risk management mitigations, importantly with kind of longer term resilience, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve and in what resources you've got open to you. So I think depending on how individual businesses work and the way that they make decisions, what their governance structure is, and how they're funded, what the priorities are, what their objectives are, there's a whole load of things you need to consider when making any decision on prioritization, and ultimately we need to kind of pull tools out of the bag that can help make those decisions, which we're well armed with in risk, and I think you can apply them to resilience as well, because ultimately you're looking at kind of fallback plans. So if with a decision tree you can kind of come up with a load of different outcomes and you understand what all those paths look like, it's about having that kind of long-term view and then kind of having a conversation about, well, which decision maps best to where we're trying to get to. And it needs to be agile, because things change quite quickly in a lot of businesses. So some might move quickly, some might move a bit slower. But some of those decisions can have like significant long-term implications. So I think it depends who, as a risk practitioner, or if it's whatever brand of risk practitioner, risk and value, risk and change. I sometimes unofficially call myself a therapist, but whatever brand of risk kind of professional you are, there's just looking at the context to start with and using some of the principles I think you've got around risk and objectives and success criteria, priorities, and then using the tools in your armoury to make the best decision you can at that point in time with the knowledge you've got. You can be, it's difficult sometimes, and I'm guilty of it. Your mind runs off to like all the different scenarios, but you've got to just deal with the situation you've got and the long-term vision, and help the business make as good a decision as you feel comfortable with in that context, I think.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
So just in your experience then, what are the most common barriers then to embedding resilience in an organisation? Like, what sort of things have you came across? And then how do you overcome these obstacles as well?
Yeah. So I touched a little bit on this before. I think one of them is kind of cultural openness to change. So, this is the way that we've always done this. Why do we need to change it? That can be one. It's kind of the openness to change. Resources, funding, or time, or systems. It usually boils back to money, but resources, whatever form that might be. So I think so. Let's start off with those two. So I think in terms of overcoming the people aspect of it, you've got to kind of be open and understand people's point of view. So having kind of empathy for a position of somebody, and understanding why they might be resistant to change, and trying to understand what they might want from a change. If you're trying to embed a kind of business change, really understanding that stakeholder, making sure that they feel heard, and trying to incorporate their understanding. If they've been doing if they've been doing a process for a number of years and they understand it well, they're going to be the expert on it. So understanding what their resistance is, where it's born from, kind of getting down to that root cause, and then trying to kind of unravel that. So if you've and if there's fears and there's concerns that come up as that, you've got to try and unpack it and understand where it's come from, and then kind of allay those fears. What's the benefit going to be from the change? So I think bringing stakeholders along, understanding their concerns, and trying your best to kind of dissolve any tension on that one. So the second aspect, kind of resources. So I think a big blocker to kind of embedding change can be if there's a cost to it, be that kind of financial or people's time, then there might not be budget for it, might not be support for it within the organisation. So you've got to then demonstrate like a business case and kind of take that through whatever governance channels you need to get investment. That can be a bit of a challenge, trying to demonstrate that there's a case for that wider change. And if it requires a project team, then you kind of got to stand up people and dedicate resources and all that. But the other aspect of kind of resources is people's time. So if they've got to accept a change, the capacity, they might have a really busy day job. It just might be a step too far to ask them to like take yourself out of that and think about this for a minute. And that can be, from requirement, but with any change, that requirements gathering and understanding kind of the problem is really important. So if they don't get involved at that point, the end product that you end up with is probably not going to satisfy everybody, and it's going to make it even worse, and the adoption piece harder later on. So I think going back to the leadership point, giving people, or kind of leadership giving people support to kind of take time away from whatever day job it is to kind of engage with that change piece is quite fundamental, because that can be a real barrier. You've got to get people to accept and change, and I think understanding what drives people is usually key to embedding change. So if somebody's pragmatic and they just want to know why you're doing something, explaining that usually I can get on board with something if I understand why it's important, and I think a lot of people are like that. So if you've got to understand your stakeholders, because people are fundamental to embedding any kind of lesson, and kind of selling the benefits to those stakeholders.
Do you think there's ever it sounded like a bit of a pessimist here, but do you think there's ever a reluctance to do it because people don't like criticism, so the thought of reflecting back on what we've done particularly badly, maybe in a lessons learned, might be I'd just rather be blissfully ignorant. Obviously, hopefully not when there's taxpayers' money involved and things like that. But from a cultural perspective, do you think that ever might be?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, I think that can be so, and that definitely goes back to culture because. But I think people definitely don't want to, not any organisation in particular, but you naturally you kind of like, have I done something wrong? When you think about lessons, you don't want to be, what went wrong? And it can be quite a difficult conversation. You're right. There can be all sorts of different topics, but the key thing is it not turning into a blame game and blame culture. It's about having a good culture, because if you've got that good culture, people feel safe to open up and be really honest about what went wrong and own up to, okay, we didn't do that very well, we could have done better. But that's, if people don't feel safe to do that, psychologically safe to open up like that, you've got to look at what's driving that.
Of course.
But you're absolutely right, that can be
interesting.
Be a barrier. I've seen various different things in my 15, 16 years now. But there's and I've seen a bit of that, but I think for the most part I've seen, certainly in nuclear environments, I've probably seen a bit more of an open culture. But I've seen some varying extents of that kind of, we can't say that.
Fingers in the ears, la 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 la. Like, don't tell me I'm rubbish.
Don't tell me I'm rubbish. I'm perfect. Can't do anything better.
Exactly. Exactly. Lovely. So just in terms of, obviously, I know we've flirted with like new technologies and AI and all that good stuff. Obviously, a lot of organisations are going to be bringing this sort of stuff in to make themselves more resilient. But do you think there might be a complication of resilient efforts as companies are trying to integrate all of these new technologies and stuff? And how do you think companies and organisations and projects will balance that? Try not to overcomplicate it, whilst in the long run, looking forward, this will make us more resilient. Or is that a problem, do you think?
I think...
Or a risk?
It's, or failure to capitalise on opportunity.
Exactly.
All of the above. It depends. I mean, so there's a couple of organisations I've been in. I've attempted to kind of take early adoption of some of the AI technologies that are out there. We've not been able to get that far with it because of, I suppose, concerns over like where data goes and what's this. And that is a concern. Like, so I think there's a real opportunity to like improve the way that we work with some of these tools and kind of take those efficiencies and have kind of but we've got to understand it, and we've got to make sure that like people are comfortable with what we're doing with it, and that takes time. Change takes time. That kind of change takes a bit of time. So there's but I think in the meantime there is a real opportunity that we miss out on things that could kind of save us lots of time. And I think the sooner that, I guess, we myth bust some of people's concerns with like new technologies, that's again comes down to kind of understanding people, understanding concerns, and kind of trying to work through that. But it depends if it's a priority. It's like there's I can't remember the analogy now, but there's a visual thing I've seen. I can't remember where it is. I'll try and find it, share it. But there's the picture of like somebody trying to push a cart with square wheels on it, and somebody's behind with a round wheel, like saying, "This will make you go faster," and like, "Sorry, I'm too busy, trying to push this cart with square wheels." And it's that kind of analogy. Like there's things out there that could make our lives a lot easier, and we need to kind of, but it's having that minute to take a step back from what you're doing, look up,
having a bit of an awareness,
look at what they're trying to offer you, and like think, okay, yeah, that's going to work, let's do it. Like, it might slow you down instantly whilst you change jack it up, change the wheels, but you're going to be flying after that. So it's that. I think that analogy works quite well in this context.
Very well.
It's like taking a step back from what you're doing, allowing people time to kind of look at what the tools are.
Yeah.
What are they going to do for us? If they're going to make our lives better, what are the concerns of your stakeholders? Working through that and then kind of embedding into your business change. But it's hard. It's hard, and it's also, there's a question there over who's responsible for that. So there's which maybe comes again. It doesn't necessarily matter when you've got an open culture, because you can have that kind of open conversation in certain forums and find the right place. But is it, maybe it should be part of your horizon scanning activity, looking at what's the, instead of AI being a risk, if it's an opportunity, who's exploring that for your management process.
No, I was going to say, I feel like it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Like you were saying earlier, there's some reluctance to it for some reasons that we won't go into today. We've touched on another podcast, but then there's also the piece of, leadership might say, that organisation or that project's doing it, so we'll do it. It's like, well, why? Don't know. Data and analytics seems to be the answer. Okay, what are we going to use it for? Don't know. And it's that, we spoke to Alan Mosca about it, and he was sort of saying it's all well and good. Like you might not even have any reluctance from some of the blockers that we've discussed in other episodes, like, AI is going to take my job, or whatever the case may be, or it's just as bad to implement it to an organisation but have no context as to why or to what or to how, and be like, well, they're doing it, so we'll do it. Why? Don't know. Sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
I think I mean, if you think about, like, usually businesses will have some form of governance structure. It's the boring stuff, but how they make decisions is usually via some form of committee. It might go, depending on how complex company is, somebody will make a decision who's got the budget, whether that be an individual in a smaller company or a board in a larger company. But you've got layers in between. So with any decision for change like that, you want to be doing it with the right, this is the problem we're trying to solve, or this is the opportunity that we've got, and kind of explaining why the thing is gonna, what's it gonna bring to us, and getting a clear understanding of that. What's it gonna cost us? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? What are we hoping for? And so governance can be really useful for, like, articulating things and opportunities, and actually just taking the time to think and articulate what it is and why, rather than just, it looks good, let's do that. If you don't know what you're getting from it, that could be a really foolish investment. Yeah. Especially because you might spend a lot of money on something and then not get the benefit.
Doesn't work out.
Well, if you don't even know what benefit you're after.
Yeah. And then you might alienate people to think it's useless as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Without the right, anything like that needs training. Change, going back, missed a few steps before, but any change needs training wrapping around it.
Yeah.
So what strategies then can organisations use to turn lessons learned into actionable insights that drive meaningful change that we've talked about, and then rather than allowing it to become sort of a mere post-event reflection?
Yeah, so I think in terms of actionable insights, so I think it comes back to having that open conversation in the first instance about, like, the lessons learned. And you need to do the lessons learned piece. Lessons are only learned when you do kind of embed that meaningful change and have actionable insights. Otherwise, it's like lessons recorded.
Yeah.
And they go in a database. So having a lessons session to soon after the event, whilst it's still fresh in everybody's mind, and depending on the culture, right, you might need to do that in different ways. So giving people some time beforehand to fill something in, raise it anonymously if it's a place where it doesn't feel safe. Even in a safe place, you might want to do that so that people can kind of just get stuff into it. Having a session to talk it all through and understand it, and then exactly what went wrong, whatever techniques you want to use to kind of get down to that root cause. And then with it might be a different group of stakeholders that you need to kind of have the second part of the conversation is, but breaking that down with people into, well, what could we do differently next time? Like how do we pick out from that, or what you need to do is pick out from that list of stuff that you could do differently, what are the things that are going to make the difference? And I think with anything, there's tools like there's the Eisenhower matrix, where you can then go and say, well, what can we do that's kind of low effort but high impact, or if it's really difficult and it's not going to have much impact, prioritize the things within there, what's going to be easy. So take your quick wins where you can, get those embedded, and then the things that are more difficult might be something that you need to kind of, as we've talked about before, go through some sort of governance steps with to get approval if it's like a bigger project. So I think having a really solid kind of lessons process to identify them. It's a bit like risk. It's not just lessons learned. It's like going through, stepping through the process and working through them with some quality kind of output, like quality outputs, and then prioritizing those kind of actions, and then making sure that they get embedded into a business process by kind of like a business change process. So it's like this. It's like that thread running through all of the processes. You don't want, like anything, a lot of organisations have silos, particularly big organisations, and you don't want like your risk process to be completely isolated from your continuity process and your lessons learned. You want it all to kind of flow seamlessly. Yeah,
and accountability to be sort of weaved all the way through it.
Yeah, but clear. And you're right, like weaved, accountability, responsibility. You need them clearly defined, but kind of weaved all the way through it.
Yeah.
And then make sure that even that, when that might not be clearly articulated in your quality management system, that all those things are joined up. So it's making sure that the hooks are there to other things, that when people are reading through process documents or following an online workflow, that they know and they can't move past a step until they've kind of
Love that. Thanks, Mark. So coming to the end, I guess. So we've got a couple of points I just wanted to touch on first. So obviously survival is the key one, and my question is going to be, what are the key indicators that organisations have successfully embedded resilience? Obviously, the fact that an organisation still exists is a pretty good indicator. It might be masking sort of more subtle issues, but are there any other key indicators other than the fact an organisation just exists, that an organisation has actually successfully embedded key lessons learned and changed into their organisation and the projects and stuff?
So I think Einstein's credited with the saying about doing the definition of insanity, being doing the same thing again and again, expecting a different result.
Yeah.
I think if a situation where people feel frustrated because like the same things are going wrong all the time, we keep making the same mistakes. Why do we keep making the same mistakes? Why have we done that again? When you kind of look at past performance and kind of performance indicators, it's looking for those, a bit like with risk, you're looking for affinities between certain things on a big program. If every project's doing the same, so like from a risk perspective, you might look at, if you're in a big program, you might look for common risks that are appearing on lots of projects.
Yeah.
And kind of aggregating that. Oh, okay. Why are they all having that same problem? And you look back at, looking back at like risks that have been closed off, if they've been sanctioned or sentenced well, like in terms of saying, this impacted, this was why, resulted in a compensation event or whatever it might be, that you can kind of gather information from your rich information database from risk, to look for all sorts of indicators like that where common things have gone wrong, and if they keep happening, if people feel frustrated, so I think there's a sorry, that was a bit all over the place.
That's okay.
There's a bank of data that I think you can kind of look to see where there's maybe common things that keep reoccurring on lots of projects or in lots of situations, and I think there's also I think the way that people feel about a business in terms of if same things happening again and again, common frustrations, as I said at the beginning, the kind of ability and sensitivity around events. So if I think keeping an eye on even the small events that are happening, and seeing how we recover from them. You know, how big of a deal is it if when you have a fire evacuation, do people know what they're doing?
Yeah.
Do they know do they know how to kind of react in those circumstances? So I think looking for small indicators from the way that people behave, the frustrations that people have, behaviours in meetings, those types of kind of really subtle indicators. But then when something significant happens, if you've got a risk that materialises, or you've got a piece of plant that goes down if you're on a construction project, or how does it recover? Have we got a second one waiting on standby? Have we not? You know, it's looking at how we perform. So your indicators will ultimately show up in if it's project or business performance, and if what are your reasons for if you're consistently having like underperformance, what's happening? So it's about kind of pulling together the whole picture that you've got, listening to those kind of subtle sounds, complaints, things that are happening, and kind of connecting the dots between what's happening, what you see, just being observant. I think that's probably.
No, it makes perfect sense. I was just reflecting back on me using the word survival, maybe out of context, sounding that it might not be resilient. But then I was thinking, for example, like a high street brand, is them surviving by closing 100 stores, them being resilient to change, or is that them suffering from a lack of business continuity and lack of resilience?
It depends what their objectives are.
Yeah.
So going back to what we said earlier, it depends. So that's a like an astute change, so that the business ultimately survives and protects its interests, and continues to trade. Whereas, you know, if they kept them open and their objective was to serve the community that consistently goes to the high street, you know, then they've failed.
Yeah.
But it depends on what the objective is ultimately, and what, so structuring those decisions around the objective, and that's actually, you know, that is being resilient, and it's taking a proactive way to change in light of what's happening in the wider world. Yeah. So this is what I've talked to today is quite general in a lot of terms, but this, you know, resilience can mean anything to anybody, can't it? You know, but I think that's a really good example of where you might change your business strategy based on being resilient to that
circumstance.
Like I say, that's when I'm thinking, well, maybe if you were more resilient, you might not have had to have done that. But I guess I'm just playing devil's advocate.
But then what this boils down to, what change have you got control of? Because if you can't change the fact that less people are going to the high street. Yeah. People shopping online.
Good point.
So that is, you've got to focus on what you can control, and you can't control. You can try and hope. You could, you know, if you wanted to keep your stores open, they could be lobbying councils to change parking restrictions, or you know, or improving public transport, or whatever it might be, to try and encourage people to go get the shops next door to offer free food if you buy whatever. There's other ways that you could try and get people to come to the store, but I suppose it ultimately just depends on what's within their control, and it's probably easier to shift stuff on. So I think it all boils back to objectives and how you define success in whatever context, and kind of keeping that thread through all of your processes and systems.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay, Mark, just to wrap it up then, so in terms of just a bit of a reflection back on everything we've discussed today, in terms of in keeping with the theme of the future of risk management, how do you see where we are now versus, I'm not going to give an objective amount of years, but how do you see how lessons learned will change, or business continuity and risk, that relationship will change over the future? Do you hope it will be for the better? Do you think we're in quite a good position now? Do you think there's room for improvement?
There's always room for improvement, isn't there? I think I think that the ability to react to things will change and speed up. So I think we need to improve generally, I think, and get more, make sure the links are clear for people between these things, joining the dots up, because there's I think as we move into kind of the new age, if you like, it'll be easier to make quicker decisions. Information will be more readily available. I suppose what we've got to do is make sure that we can rely on that information first of all to make the right decision. So there's a in terms of the like transition, however long that might be, a constant thing. There's, I think, understanding how we kind of adapt to that rapid change and making sure that the decisions that we are advising people to take have joined up thinking all the way through. I think we can always do better on that. There's always silos to break down. There's always kind of there's always connections that we can make that are not naturally thought through. So I think that's how we need to change in terms of like and where we can kind of improve that link. But there's always more that can be done on like on lessons and resilience, and it all depends on how much resource you've got, really, doesn't it?
Exactly.
How much time you've got to focus on stuff. But I think my hope would be if some of the aspects of this role become more automated and become quicker and like need us to kind of spend less time doing the analysis, it's taking that to the next level of, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for this? What does that mean for that? And you can broaden out the picture. So I think that's how I see it.
No, exactly, because people might be listening to this who work in an organisation where they do things like lessons learned workshops and things like that. But like you say, if it just gets lost in the ether, they might potentially reconsider, oh, well, on paper we're doing it, we're following the process, but it's not really... We've done 3 of the same lessons learned in the last 3 years or something. So yeah, no, I think that was the big takeaway from me, and that I think there might be some organisations and projects and individuals that have worked in those or environments where, on the face of it, they're doing good. The business continuity is good, and they're doing things like lessons learned. But as we keep reflecting on, it's not really being implemented. It's not being embedded deep down.
Yeah, I think if people are in that like space where if it's a large organisation with lots of different projects, for example, when you launch into like lessons activities, go and look at what's already there, because you become part of the problem by just generating more in some instances. But if they've been learned before, it's kind of like collating things into a picture. There's a really good document actually by the IPA on I think it's sponsorship of major projects, lessons from sponsorship of major projects, and it's kind of, they've collated lessons from like Crossrail, Highways, Network Rail, and they kind of group themes together. It's a really, really good document for if you're kind of in infrastructure world. I'll try and get the links.
I was going to say, is it?
Yeah, it's publicly available.
Public, yeah. I'll pop it in the podcast notes.
I'll send you the link. Yeah, there's but it's a really good document for kind of like that's kind of captured lessons from different things, found the affinities between them, and gives kind of recommendations for implementing. So there's stuff out there, and it's probably not, you're not going to you're going to be reinventing the wheel. That's what I'm trying to say with some of the lessons that you come up with. Yeah. So I think seek other people out. So if you're kind of working on in a big organisation with lots of projects and you're doing lessons learned, like find the other stuff that's already there and look for those affinities. It just takes a little bit of work to kind of look through stuff. But then if you've got somebody, or if you've got somebody that could do some analysis, or you've got an AI tool that you can kind of put all of this into, I don't know, to kind of like all of your library of stuff and give me the top insights from it. There's something in that, in the amount of lessons learned information that's out there on, there must be absolutely tons of it in lots of different libraries that could be a really good source for an engine or some simple analysis on looking at what those common things. And then if it's risk that needs to go into your risk register, or it's a business change, or it's an issue, or it's an assumption, or whatever it is, that it just making sure that it makes it into the right place so that somebody can do something about it. That's kind of disseminating disseminate that information to the right place.
Love that.
Yeah, nice. So just lastly then, Mark, we always end the podcast episode the same. So it's just a bit of a piece of advice that you'd give to your younger self, maybe at the start of your career with all your knowledge and experience now.
I think I would say have the confidence to speak your mind and ask the questions. So, and you might have people have probably said that before, but
No, they definitely have.
So I think it can feel quite intimidating working in this role. I think from particularly in certain environments, and when you sat in a room with lots of people who you might think have got very experienced, experts in their field, they've got a lot of experience. You might feel like your question is like, that's a daft question, I'm not going to ask that. Odds are somebody else might be thinking it, but even if they're not, like, you've got a really good question, so ask it. Like, or if you've got a point and you see something that maybe other people haven't, we all think differently. And I think understanding that over time, I've probably got more confidence now than I would have had previously to maybe speak up in certain situations where you see something, speak up, say it, don't be afraid. And I think there's a so I've heard somebody say where I am at the minute, like if you ask the question, be a fool for a minute. If you don't ask the question, be a fool for a lifetime. I think that's really true. So if and there's been situations where I haven't asked it and I wish and somebody else asks later and you think should have asked that. But see, just ask the question or make the statement and don't have the confidence and conviction in what you're seeing to do it. I think that's probably
hurts even more if somebody else asks a question you were going to ask and the person goes, "Oh, that's a really good question. Well done." You're like, "No,
I should have asked that."
But no, absolutely love that, Mark. I think you're living, breathing proof of that. To not be afraid to speak here on a podcast talking about something that you're passionate about. And I'd commend you. I think it's been fascinating. So thanks so much for coming along.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Just final piece. If anybody wants to get in touch with you regarding any of the stuff you've discussed today, what would be the best POC?
Drop us a message on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest.
Sound.
Cool.
We'll pop the Mark's link to his LinkedIn in the podcast notes. But again, Mark, thanks so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Worries.
It's been
Thanks,
great.
guys. Cheers.
Legend. Thank you.
And that's it for this week. If you enjoyed this episode of Riskologists, be sure to follow Optimise and Riskologists on all of our social media channels, where you can subscribe to the podcast and be notified of every episode so you don't miss a thing.
Please like, share and leave reviews to help support us and increase our reach within the wider risk community.
And join us next time, where we'll be chatting with another leading figure in the world of risk.
Until then, thanks for listening and take it easy.